Welcome to the Silicon Fox podcast, where we explore the habits and stories of high performers. Join us as we dive into their journeys, analyze live blood tests, and break down the science behind key biomarkers to help you optimize your health. I'm your host, Mitchell Eschner, an ex-pro soccer player, a current sponsored hybrid athlete, a health tech founder, and a longevity enthusiast. Thank you so much for hopping on the Silicon Fox podcast.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I always love to start out with people's stories just a little bit. It's always useful to set that as a primer. Obviously, not everyone knows you, so just give us the background. Who are you and what are you working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Cory Henderson, and I got my PhD in molecular biology. Really focused on ways to start my career in which we can integrate genetics as a useful tool to address public health issues. For a while, I was creating mosquitoes to prevent transmission of malaria. And I used that as a way to essentially learn genetic engineering and understand kind of how you can take these new tools, integrate them into a regulatory landscape, and then actually, implement that kind of a solution. And so I used a lot of that information to then lead to the company that we founded, Evolv, and the development of our first product, an orally available GLP-1 mimetic.
Amazing. Yeah. So Evolv was a spin out from the PhD. How did Evolv come about? Just give us the breakdown and what inspired you to start this kind of business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was working on these gene drive mosquitoes. That was actually the impetus for starting the company, essentially looking for ways to apply the technology I was developing, a way to make genetic edits work better at scale. And initially, I thought I would apply this to mosquitoes, but as happens often with startups, you pivot. At that time, I was also thinking about other kinds of molecules that would benefit from being able to be produced at high scale. And also, I was interested in integrating into food systems. I saw this as a unique platform through which we could deliver new health solutions, right? So at the time, people, as they still are, really excited about GLP-1. A lot of people were coming to me and asking me about GLP-1, which I actually knew a lot about as a diabetes treatment. And so I was like, why are people now interested in this for weight loss? I knew that people could use it, essentially that was a side effect, but now people were wanting it for that sole purpose. And I realized that we had an opening. If you could create an orally available version that was created of only natural elements, now you can apply this to what I call a consumer indication as opposed to treating a disease, right? And I think that really opens up a whole new avenue for addressing public health, which I said is my background and the way I really approach engineering is ways in which we can create new solutions and apply them at high scales. So essentially making them accessible. And that's what really opened up, I think, is one of the most interesting projects and things that I've created in my life. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah. A lot of people are using GLP-1, so I've got some spicy questions for you, but just want to set another primer to make sure that we kind of have some of our terms defined here. Could you just go over the basics of what are GLP-1s? What's the science behind it? Before we dive into how they're being used in society and what's going on with them, period.
Absolutely, yeah. So GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. So it is a hormone that we produce in our body. This is released after we eat a meal. It is related to insulin secretion, reducing your blood glucose, making you feel full, preventing gastric emptying so that your body has more time to digest that food. This is what needs to happen after you eat a meal. And so this molecule GLP-1 is released. It is very useful in the therapeutic realm because if you can make a version that stays in your body for a very, very, very long time, you can get this long-term glycemic control. So essentially, it's glucose dependence. You can lower your glucose, but not completely eliminate it, as opposed to insulin, which is not glucose dependence. You can go hypoglycemic. So this is why this molecule was identified. We knew it was in the body. We knew some of the effects it had. But a problem with our own GLP-1 is that it lasts about 2 minutes. So you eat a meal, let's say you eat a bag of chips, you get a spike of GLP-1, it's almost addictive, right? You feel good by having eaten it. That's why it's related to satiation and things like this, right? Um, but then it disappears from your body very quickly, right? So you then have this depletion effect, and then people want to eat more and more. And so I think this is what leads to overeating and often results in things like diabetes, right? So it's very intimately related there. And so what people found is that if you created a version that was in your body longer, that would stay, that could keep it lower. And then what they saw is that eventually this led to outcomes like reducing weight. But that is not necessarily a disease, right? Losing weight. And so now we have essentially this middle ground area where our own natural GLP-1 goes out of your body so quick that you can't get much of a benefit from it if you have a supplement that increases your GLP-1 secretion, right? But the therapeutics stay in your body too long. They lead to adverse events like nausea, gastroparesis, all these other things. So there's a middle ground that needs to be met, right? Where you can have the effect of appetite suppression, but that it's not so strong and doesn't persist so long that it results in what I refer to as toxicity, right? So it's a very healthy, interesting molecule, but it's to be applied for weight loss, you really have to consider, you know, what happens when a healthy person takes it, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, so that kind of leads me to the next point in a question on personalization on such a mass used kind of supplement, if that's what we can call it. Like, there's few, and it depends on the strain, it depends on who's manufacturing in which ways, and all these kinds of things. But like, we hear of stories of adverse events of maybe it's the case of toxicity and incorrect dosing, but even beyond the dosing. How does one personalize? Like, how does this mass GLP-1 craze continue if there's a lack of personalization? It's the same product that's being distributed to everyone.
Absolutely. So I think that's actually where what we have created steps in is the ability to unlock that personalization. So I mentioned that with the synthetic versions, these drugs, they're engineered to stay in your body for a very long time. So, you can't get a personalized dose as easily, right? If you take too much or you take too little, then you're kind of locked into that dose for about 2 weeks with the GLP-1s that are out there now. They have a half life of about a week, so maybe a week and then some time, right? So if you take too much, then it's going to be too much for that amount of time, right? And they're engineered to be very potent, right? So if you want to personalize, what people are trying to do is they essentially modify these injectors to inject a very small amount, but really it's impossible to achieve that true microdose because it's still going to stay in for so long. And so what I think people really want is the ability to get that short-term regulation of appetite, right? The ability to take a small dose, feel that appetite suppression in the healthy realm, right? Like these are people that are not trying to treat diabetes, that are not obese, but they're healthy people trying to lose a healthy amount of weight. They want to get that appetite suppression for a short amount of time and then have it go away. And they want it to be mild. And so that's where the microdosing comes in, the personalization. People want to kind of experiment, find that right dose, and not be locked in for too long, because that's when you start to
Interesting.
have the bad side effects, right? So really, right now, there's nothing that really unlocks what people are looking for, which is this personalization. Where the compounders trying to fit in, but they're really taking these molecules that were designed for people with a disease that needs to be treated and trying to fit it into this category that is completely different.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That's interesting. I mean, I know it's not, mass done today, so that's obviously a pretty big breakthrough if that's able to be mass consumed. On the genetic front, obviously there's genetic dispositions on the diabetes front of side of things. How does this play in with GLP-1s? Are there so-called hyper responders to GLP-1s in the molecule that is composed, or how does that kind of process work? And microdosing, I guess, would answer the question because you find your own dose regardless of your genetic breakthrough, or genetic disposition. But is there a genetic sequence for a type of person that just cannot handle GLP-1s?
Oh wow, that's interesting. That's an interesting question. So genetics plays a role, but also, for lack of a better, epigenetics, right? So the things that happen throughout our life that impact, gene expression and things like that. So one thing that's going to impact it is going to be receptor density, right? Some people are going to have more GLP-1 receptors and some people are going to have less, right? And especially if you're eating a lot of processed foods, you might end up with fewer receptors and then, over time, right? Like any receptor that happens to, maybe lead to an addictive outcome, right? This happens when you blast that receptor full on. So there's changes that, you can have a predisposition maybe to have a higher receptor density. This means you're going to respond more strongly to GLP-1. But then, you can have these epigenetic factors, maybe because you eat a lot of processed foods, your receptor density goes down. And so you might respond, lower. And maybe we would need more GLP-1 to feel the same effect. And I think that's where a lot of the personalization comes in. If you're have diabetes, your doctor is going to be helping you find that right dose. But if you're a healthy person trying to lose weight, it's a much smaller dose. And you're probably trying to find, precisely where do I feel what I want to feel. But, can I work? How can I pull back to? Right. So I think that's where personalization is pretty important.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to talk about the life cycle of GLP-1 usage and like the initial, and we'll jump into the science of habit a little bit because that seems to be a pretty big role here. But um, there's I've been looking at GLP-1s. I run a company in the health and performance space, and so it got really relevant to me as this blew up. And there's such conflicting data on what actually happens afterwards, right? The initial big question that everyone had was because there's been massive fads, whether it's juicing, the smoothie juicing, juice cleanse, and all these kinds of other things that maybe in slightly more natural or less natural ways across the spectrum are able to help with weight loss. But the next question always became was like, okay, well, this is not a sustainable way of life. I can't be doing this for the next 40 years. How does that work? And so I could not for the life of me find reliable data that was not completely conflicting, where, one health organization says 6 to 7% of people only experience weight regain after 16 weeks, and some people said 80%. So how do we think about that? I guess where's your stance on what you see as true, especially being much deeper in the space than most of us? Would love to just get your thoughts on like that process of the journey, because the gratification of what GLP-1s can do for us in the short term is amazing, but like looking forward, amazing, ignoring the side effects that maybe some have, but then looking forward, how is it sustainable as a culture?
That's an amazing question, and clearly you've been thinking a lot about GLP-1 space, so I like that. So as far as long term, I think it's contextual, right? So if we're looking at the way people typically interact with the GLP-1 receptor agonists, if they're being prescribed by their doctor for obesity, right? So you have an obese person, they're going to be injecting themselves with high amounts of this to go to a BMI of 30 or maybe 27, right? And then legally you have to come off of it, right? So typically losing a lot of weight very fast, and then they have to come off of it. This is creating a context that's going to lead to immediate regain, right? You're taking away the solution before they've reached a balance that they're able to sustain, right? What people are really looking for is a way to get to that healthy weight and then maintain it while their body essentially rehabilitates, right? So I mentioned receptor density, right? So you haven't really fixed the receptor density problem, right? You've filled the receptor, you've made yourself feel full if you're losing a lot of weight very quickly. But then if you come off of it immediately, your body hasn't had time to essentially go back to that normal state, right? But if you're able to stay on the GLP-1 long enough for you to be able to integrate those lifestyle changes that are really what's necessary to maintain that, then if you're able to maintain the GLP-1 while you're integrating those lifestyle changes, then you reach a point which is balance and you come off, and then you're going to be able to maintain that much longer, right? So it's contextual, right? It depends on how you're using it. And honestly, this rebound is not necessarily a bad thing for pharma, right? This actually plays into a pharmaceutical business model, right?
Right.
You get the person to a healthy state, and then they have to come off of it, and then the unhealthy state reappears. You re-prescribe them, right? I view a different kind of business opportunity in which people can be on this long term and to maintain those health effects, right? Something that works in conjunction with pharma, right? Like, I don't want to treat the disease, but I want to help you stay healthy, right? And then integrate those lifestyle changes. And then if you want to come off because you feel better, that's one thing. I, choose to stay on at low levels to be able to maintain energy balance and things like that. So there's a lot that a healthy person can get from staying on a GLP-1, even at a healthy weight, that I personally feel, right? But in terms of reaching that balance and the rebound, I think it depends a lot on the context.
So, okay, so you just said two things that I want to double click into because I'm
Mhm.
currently not on GLP-1s. I'm not necessarily looking for any kind of weight loss, but if there's side benefits, I'd love to jump into what those are.
Yeah.
But before that, I want to talk a little bit about this, like the lifestyle change. But let's get a little bit more specific as to what those are. And so, is the belief that I'm giving you I guess, like what's the psychology behind it? So, okay, so you have weight loss, you're excited by it, but you still need to implement lifestyle changes. Um,
Mhm.
from like a first principles perspective, I guess some people may go straight to the lifestyle changes. Clearly, they're not. So clearly, GLP-1s is the reason GLP-1s is such a great business because people are not. But on the flip side, since they were not willing to in the first place, what's the psychological shift that you think we will see or we are seeing? Like, it's simple to say we want lifestyle changes. Are we seeing that? Maybe I'm just not seeing the data, which is very possible, likely. But you know, because if the goal is to cycle off or even to maintain smaller and smaller doses, right, there has to be lifestyle changes that I have not been implementing before. How does one go about that? And then the second question that obviously want to touch on is for my own use case, why would I use GLP-1s?
All right. So on the first one, if I'm, can you reiterate? I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, yeah. So if I take say someone wants to lose weight, they take GLP-1s, but that has to be coupled with lifestyle changes.
Yes.
I guess you have two paths. You can go direct to source and go lifestyle changes. Clearly, people aren't, and that's why GLP-1s is such a phenomenal business. But on the flip side, what makes like a business think that people are going to start incorporating lifestyle changes? Is it the gratification of seeing what it's like to be in this kind of state, if you will? Or is it something that I have to use for the next 40 years in
So
conjunction with lifestyle changes?
absolutely. So I think what this does is it makes the lifestyle changes easier to adopt. So I think the people that are using GLP-1 are most likely customers here are people that are trying to make some kind of a change and they're not seeing the results they want to see, right? They're trying dieting, but it's really hard to implement that, right? Because they have such a strong desire to continue snacking. I feel this a lot, right? I don't necessarily have a weight problem, but I actually had pre-diabetes before I started, you know, trying various glucose control mechanisms. And I found that when my glucose was more balanced, was more stable, then I was driven to snack less, and then my resting blood glucose lowered, right? And that this all led to it being easier for me to pass up a snack, right? So for me, being a healthy person, I found that that glucose regulation helped me to implement a lifestyle change that was really good, and that I personally wanted to implement, but I found hard, right? And so it
Got it.
makes it easier to make the change, right? And then if you think about exercising, right, like that's something that people should implement, right? A lot of people don't. It's hard to exercise. Maybe their joints hurt. It's hard to exercise when you are overweight, and if you can't lose that weight, it's hard to continue working out if you're not seeing the results. And so this is another way in which, if you can see the results and that tool helps you to get the kickstart, then it helps to implement the longer term lifestyle change, right?
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think that's a great way to approach it. If people are able, yeah, that's kind of what I mentioned. That you have the gratification, you then force this habit on people that just don't have the potential power of will to implement. I think that's going to do wonders for the world. Yeah. On the second question, yeah. So why do I take GLP-1s if I'm not looking to lose weight?
Yeah, absolutely. So I found the energy balance was the most important thing for me. Like my perspective before I started using my own product, I would crash in the middle of the day. I would eat a meal. I would feel very energetic for like 30 minutes or so, and then I crash and I like nap almost every day, right? What I found is that I then had less of that spike and then that crash, and that I was able to maintain like a really productive level of energy throughout the day. And I find that I keep that when I'm on like a low level. And when I come off, it doesn't necessarily, it's not like I necessarily go and like have a crazy energetic imbalance, but it made my energy balance better. I was less irritable throughout the day, and it made me, a more functional, productive person. And so I actually like, as a person that is a healthy weight that does not have a glucose control problem, that actually was really beneficial to me, and why I continue taking the supplement that we created.
And and this is because of glycogen regulation, or what's the
Um,
tie to?
it's more about glucose regulation, right? So if you can imagine it, so what GLP-1 does is it keeps a low level of insulin in your body, like not so much that you like drops below healthy levels, right? But it prevents you from having these crazy spikes, and these crazy spikes often come in alignment with a big dip, right? So if you can imagine, it goes up and then it comes down and then goes below a certain level, right? So if you're on GLP-1, the spikes are lower and then the dips are lower, right? And so you don't get that same um,
Got it.
dump of glucose, but then you also don't get that same crash that comes in alignment, right? So being able to prevent that crash means that you're stable for longer. And then I actually, instead of crashing and going to sleep, I stay awake and I work throughout the entire afternoon.
Do you take this in conjunction with energy sources like caffeine, or like what's the interplay of some of these compounds?
Um, it's interesting.
Because I see it being a great alternative. I see it being a
Yeah, it,
great
it
alternative
is.
in some
I
capacity.
find I actually drink less caffeine and other things that might lead to an addictive impulse. I think I have a bit of an addictive personality, so things like caffeine I tend to be drawn to. And so I actually find that I'll drink caffeine to maintain my energy throughout the day. But I find when I'm on the GLP-1, I find that I crave these things less. And so I'm not reaching for it because I'm tired. I'm not reaching for it because I have that like that satiation stimulus. And so I actually end up drinking caffeine less. It's my perspective. So that's an interesting finding from my end. But there is an interplay, but you know, they have similar effects. And I found personally when I started taking the GLP-1, I needed less of things like caffeine and some of these other things that typically will align with like weight loss and appetite suppression.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Gotcha. Makes a lot of sense. I'll have to try it out. I want to jump a little bit into how you guys are using or potentially thinking about, or even how the industry could use artificial intelligence. You obviously brought up a great point where in theory, it's maybe like a front end of an artificial intelligent type user experience and not necessarily on a deep native level, but like because the microdosing, in theory you would find out your own dose, you wouldn't really need to have AI play a role of like microdosing and side effect management. But if there is a world in which that exists, what does it look like, and is there an interplay where artificial intelligence can look at some of my, whether it's genetic data, biometric data, blood lab, and can assess what's the correct dosing and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm really excited about the integration of AI and big data into health, right? Especially in the consumer realm. My my background is actually in bioinformatics and computational biology, and so I do a lot of collecting these huge data sets and then drawing useful information out of it. Usually, it's for population genetics and health, right? So perfect alignment here, I think, is more people are getting this data like genome sequencing, and they're collecting things like heart rate, perspiration, hydration levels. There's a lot of things that you can collect that will feed into these big data models, and then we're going to be able to draw really unique insights out of it. I'm personally excited. As I was testing this, I also wore a CGM to kind of be able to track some of those changes. And honestly, it's like the GLP-1 supplement helped me to implement certain changes that I wanted to make. But then also seeing the data in real time helped me to kind of understand the interplay between like the things I was eating and then the impact on my body. And this also helped me to kind of, make changes or really just think more critically about how I was treating my body. And so I think obviously as this goes along, we would like to leverage that data to see to track the effectiveness of our products and then also to help inform new products that we might want to make, right? So I think there's a lot to be done. I think we're really at a unique time with
Yeah.
AI and data collection as it intersects with health and biology.
Yeah, I mean that's super exciting. Yeah, I mean that touches a lot of. I actually was just at a talk. I heard I think John Jumper was his name from DeepMind speak on some of the, basically took us from what is a cell to how is AlphaFold built and what does AlphaFold do. It was crazy. It was one of the best lectures I've listened to.
I
Um,
love that.
an interesting one for you. I curious on other peptides or protocols or just solutions that you think are alternative to GLP-1s that could take over GLP-1s. Have to ask the invasive question.
I think so much about that. I don't want to get too into like the protocols that we're
Sure.
excited about because we're actually integrating them into products, right? But as a little bit of a hint, there's a as we start to be able to unlock what I said, this oral delivery of biologics, right, so that we can apply them to consumer products, then we start to be able to go after these indications that were previously inaccessible that I view as being related to longevity, right? So, muscle growth is something that is, consumer indication. This is something that we can. There's molecules that we have great data for that we can then integrate into our platform in a new way to be able to address muscle growth as a consumer indication as opposed to say muscular dystrophy treatment, right? So now that we have a new way to deliver in a consumer product, now we're able to go after things like the muscle growth, like heart health and performance, right? As a consumer product, we can go after things like women's health and fertility. Hair growth is something that we're talking a lot about these days. So once you can achieve that with a natural molecule in an oral format, you're able to do things that we previously weren't able to do as products. And so that's where I think we're going to be building, and where I think the most exciting advancements are going to be made in the next couple of years, you by people like
Yeah,
us.
no, amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. Definitely interesting, and maybe we'll touch a little bit more on kind of some things you guys are doing. But want to talk a little bit about habit. There's like a big habitual component here. How do you guys? And we could jump into a little bit more on habit science, but on a high level, how do you guys think about habit formation as a company? How much do you investigate habit when building products, whether it's just UI UX all the way to uh, different kind of scientific methodologies?
I love that you're asking about habits because it was actually the first research I ever did in my life back in undergrad was on stone tool decisions by like ancient hominids. So my entire career, I've been thinking about, how does a human or humanoid make a decision about things in its environment? Why would it choose one thing over another, right? And what I find is proximity and quality, right? So if you're and proximity doesn't just mean like how close am I physically to something, right? Like, am I a foot away from my coffee cup? But really, it's something. The way I think about it is proximity from an economic and a social sense, right? So how do I move a person closer to GLP-1, right? Make it a product, make it less toxic, make it at a micro dose. Now we can take the, make it less expensive. Now I can reduce the proximity between a person and the product, the health intervention that I want to provide, and that impacts the decision making, right? Because people are thinking, what's closest to me? This is what's available. This is what's in my environment that I can use to impact my life, right? And then quality, right? So if there's two things that are close to me, then I'm going to choose the one that works better, right? Or that fits into my lifestyle a certain way until it saturates essentially the expectation that I have, right? So if my expectation, say, is 5% weight loss over 6 months, then anything over that, it's kind of gravy, right? I don't necessarily need it. So I'm going to choose the thing that then meets other metrics that I care about, right? Like cost, convenience, right? So the thing you're going to choose the thing that works best first, right? But then once you've saturated the things you need, you're going to start to choose based on other elements. And I think that's where we can start to unlock new value with biology, right? We can see, where have we saturated and how can I start to address these other components to reduce that proximity and make people start choosing a different intervention, right? And that's where I make things healthier, make them orally available, make them cheaper, right? Make it so that you can buy it without a prescription. These are the things that I think where we start to think about chronic health and wellness, right, as opposed to treatment of diseases.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's clearly where the world's heading with a lot of these pretty innovative companies. Um, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but is it that the effect of dopamine on some of this habit formation is the belief and the reality? I guess there's got to be, something out there that has proof on this or not, that as I form these habits with GLP-1s, I snack less. There's now whether it's rewiring my neurocircuitry or there's some kind of dopamine reaction to I no longer want to snack either when I go off or when I microdose. Um, how do you guys think about that as a company? Is there research? Again, I was not able to find too much research on this. Is there research out there that you find interesting on these correlations?
Yeah, so I think dopamine is like our reward signal, right? And actually, dopamine and a lot of these other things are downstream effects of a lot of the signaling that happens because of GLP-1, right? So feeling that reward, feeling that pleasure from making a decision is very important for someone to then make that decision again. I think it's important to feel the spike, the response, that happiness, that reward in response to positive increases, right? So not necessarily receiving that reward all the time for every decision you make, right? Which is what you might get from eating like a highly processed food, right? You're going to get that bump of GLP-1, that serotonin, that dopamine reward, and then it's going to go away, right? But instead, what you want is you want to be able to control it, right? You want to get that reward not all the time, but in response to making a healthy choice, in response to doing something good, right? So you want that dopamine rush to come in response to seeing your weight go down or in response to seeing your performance go up, not necessarily in response to eating the chips, right? And so I think the way GLP-1 intersects with that is it makes you feel that it makes you feel better more consistently because you're not having that dearth of that positive signal, right? You're maintaining that. And then you start to feel good about the other things that intersect with your lifestyle as opposed to seeking that good feeling from the chips, right? Or from the cookie or whatever you might happen to want to snack on, right? So I think dopamine is extremely important and finding ways in which we can stop the dopamine response in response to unhealthy decisions and promote the dopamine response in response to healthy decisions, right? That's really what I think about in terms of, modifying behavior, right? I think that's something that's really important.
Just out of curiosity, like, do you view this company as a habit company? How do you? I think you got excited to talk about habit. Like, how do you? Yeah, how do you think about habit and health habits in general as you guys build this business?
I don't know if I would consider us a habit company, but habits, decision making, why do people do things is something that's really core to, how I build, right? I want to make things that people want to use. And so that's just part of my design philosophy. If you're going to use something that I'm creating, I want you to feel an effect that you're going to keep coming back for, right? Like I don't want to deliver false promises. And so for me that the I guess the habit formation or the why do people make a decision is just it's so critical to how I consider building that's why I get so excited about it. But really, what we are is not, we're a consumer product company, right? But really, what we're delivering are health and wellness solutions, right? So I don't like to think of us as supplements necessarily because I think we actually deliver on a lot of the promises that supplements make, but don't actually deliver on. So that's why I like to use the term biomimetics, right? Like that's really the company that I think we are, right? We are able to create these new kinds of molecules that interact with your body in a new way. And we sell that to you in a way that reduces the barriers to access, right? So that's the kind of company we are, I would say.
Makes a lot of sense. I want to talk a little bit about the vision and where things are headed. How does the health world change in the next 5 to 10 years? I'm going to put you on the spot there, and just what role do you think Evolve plays um, in whether again habit formation, weight loss, or things way beyond that?
Absolutely. I think I mean, we're already starting to see this, right? But I think there's going to be even more of a transition away from treatment of infectious diseases, treatment of diagnosable illnesses. These are still important, but I think there's going to be a transition more towards preventative health, right? Preventing people from reaching that unhealthy state. And I think right now, the thought process, the thought of how we apply biotech is that it should only be, is that you create it to create drugs that treat illnesses, right? But really, what I want to do, and I think more people are starting to appreciate, is that we can use these tools, things like CRISPR genetic engineering, right? Things like AlphaFold, which you mentioned, right? A lot of these computational tools that didn't exist 5, 10 years ago, right? Now they do. We can start to apply these not to treat those diseases, but to start delivering on other promises, right? To prevent you from getting sick, right? And that usually means making you you know, I think about it like self-actualization, right? Like you have that's an important part of health, right? Like I think that's part of preventative health, right? Like if you're able to get closer to the vision of you that you have in your head, then you're going to feel healthier and then you're going to start making healthier decisions too. And so I think helping people towards that self-actualization process through things like I said, weight loss, hair growth, muscle growth, heart health and performance, like these are, and women's health and fertility, these are the things that are really going to, as I said, fit into that category of preventative health. So delivering on those promises, I think, is what's really going to be important. So
And it's across a suite of different products, right? Whether it's you guys
yeah.
do just oral
Mhm.
intake, or is it protocols? Like just a quick high level breakdown if you don't want to get too specific.
A combination of things, right? My design philosophy is actually on our whiteboard behind us. I was talking to my CTO earlier. We're right now at the stage where we're picking which pathways we're really interested in, right? Then we start designing molecules to fit within those. Our focus right now is oral biologics delivery. Our technology really applies itself so amazingly there. There's so much that can be applied to increase the health of the population that this is what we're building right now. So we're not necessarily ignoring topicals or other things like that, but really oral biologics and choosing those targets is where we're really excited right now. And then we'll move through a pipeline and some products will be like a single molecule, some will be a combination. Certain things you want to do in a pulsed way, you're on at some and you're off at others. Certain molecules you may want to be on long term. And my philosophy is that your personal decision needs to play a major role in that. And so there's going to be a lot of like we talked about customization and personalization of dosing, right? Which is why we want to create things that are low dose and that we test at extremely high doses to make sure they're safe and effective.
Do you think the business world is outpacing science? I like I'm kind of getting this trend when I have these talks with people that whether it's a low barrier to entry, and again, like you kind of can evaluate it from a philosophical perspective and say, well, is it still net positive for society, or is it a negative to people, and that we shouldn't have some of these supplements out in the world, some of these wearables. Um, yeah, just what do you think? You're probably also pretty deep in this space. So from a lot of the things that you see, have we gone too far from science and we're outpacing just because we can sell the next trend?
No, I actually think it's the other way around. I think business is actually catching up to tech finally. I think what we're seeing now with biotech is very similar to what we were seeing with computing back in like the 60s and 70s, right? Where we had computing start to come out of academics and start to come out of, these like industry where there were only like very high cost and like very slow applications, right? As the computing started to get better and cheaper, we were able to start giving it to more and more people, and it created questions, right? But ultimately it was something that as the technology got better, the business world started to realize, how can we apply this to the existing problems of today to make things work better, right? And I think we're starting to see that with biotech, because of advances in the engineering, so in things like CRISPR, right, the actual putting the genes into new things, and in the in silico prediction, right, so the ability like for things like AlphaFold, right, to be able to say, with some level of confidence what may or may not happen before you go and do like some kind of huge study. So the fact that these factors are now in play means that we can move, I can do something now for like $2 million in 2 years that maybe would have taken, 20 to $200 million and 10 years if I had started this, 20 years ago, right? So I think now that the science has advanced to a certain point, now we can start to take these kinds of advancements, this amazing technology that exists, and start to apply it in new ways to address things that aren't necessarily locked in the pharma realm or in the research realm. So that's my perspective, is that
Yeah,
business is
no, it's
catching up.
super fair. Super fair. Yeah, I mean, it's also exciting. It means there's a lot of room for opportunity for businesses to grow and blossom. Do you think it's net positive that the world is moving towards health in the consumer's hands? We used to kind of be in a world where health was the back end of a physician's knowledge, and I'd have to go and meet with a physician to understand things. And now we see all of these companies that give me a lot of the opportunities to really take charge of my health. But that also gives me a lot of more responsibility than maybe I'm intellectually capable for, if we're going to be really honest here, across the spectrum of most people. Um, so how do you think that looks like, especially because we actually talked about this on a few previous episodes, that the companies that may win now not necessarily are the ones that are most deep rooted in science, but maybe the ones that are able to capture eyeballs better than the others. So I may have the best social media game, thus my product will get used. And since you are now in charge of your own health and the consumers, the shift is there. We have no guarantees that the world becomes healthier with this new holistic health movement. So what do you think that looks like?
I think it's a thorny question for sure. I believe that incorporating more personal decision making and appealing to the consumer is very important when we're thinking about chronic health and wellness and preventing someone to reaching an unhealthy state, right? And so in that way, I think you ultimately have to communicate with the consumer, and I think it's a net positive that we're doing that. Now, I think we can go too far in that direction, right? We can start to give too much power to the consumer and essentially take away that power from providers, right? So I think the barrier needs to be when we're talking about an illness versus, maintenance of a healthy state, right? I think you should still include your doctor in a lot of these decisions, right? Make sure that the interventions you're using are going to be, that they're going to actually have the effect you want to have, because there is so much dishonesty in especially the supplement realm, right? But I think so long as we're able to strike that balance between, like people being able to make effective decisions for themselves, but also be able to do so with an understanding that what they're taking is going to be safe, and that they can also rely on their doctors and the medical practitioners to give them, honest information, right? So understanding that they don't have an incentive to say keep you on a drug long term, right? Is going to be important, right? And also to make sure that they have an honest and deep and true understanding of things that exist in the supplement realm, right? And so that's why for us, communication, doing things like this and talking about our product and what we created is so important, right? Making sure that people understand, that it does work, why it's effective, and communicating what they want to do with their doctors. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. I don't think it should just be doctors telling you what to do, and I also don't think you should be you should be the only one making those decisions for yourself, right? I think it's an interplay, and I think that complexity, exists in all aspects of our lives, as does with this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see if the medical infrastructure can keep up, and if the medical academia rigor and even curriculum can keep up with the fact that the world is changing so fast. Because that's another part of it, right? Like, what makes a physician more qualified to evaluate some of these new supplements than me, when we both have access to the same information and they're not even learning it? And like, of course, there's bases and foundations that are learned that I may not have, but it becomes quite interesting. Cory, I want to jump into a rapid fire with you. I'm just going to ask you a question. Let me know what give me the first thing that comes to mind. We just want to get to know you a little bit better. What's the weirdest person you've ever met?
Um, Gosh, do I count? Can I say myself?
Sure,
I've met
sure. You'll
so
be
many
the
weird
first.
people, and I love weirdness. I mean, you can imagine doing what I do. You see weird people all the time. I don't necessarily want to identify people as weird, but I love the weirdness, and so I think maybe that means that I attract the weirdness. Maybe that means I'm a weird person. So
There you go.
I'll answer that.
There you go. You're the first. What is something that you believe that you think everyone can actually agree on?
Highly processed foods are causing major negative effects on our physical and mental health. I mean, I can't say that enough. I think that we really need to start eating healthier, and I think people really, agree with me. Whether or not you think GLP-1 is the appropriate, the appropriate tool or a tool to use, regardless, I think we can agree that we've relied too much on these highly processed foods, and we need to find a better balance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
What's an industry or breakthrough that you're most excited about outside of what you're building, or maybe even outside of your industry?
Let's see. Outside of what I'm creating, which obviously I think is the most exciting, I think there's a lot of interesting work being done on microbiomes and epigenetics, right? Understanding, not the things that are necessarily hard coded in our DNA, but the things that are more related to our environment that we do pass on and transmit to our offspring, right? But in unique ways, right? I think this is, excited to see what solutions come in this area because I've researched it, and I would also, particularly like to, continue building in that area too.
Talking about your academic career, what do you think academia is still worth it?
Oh gosh, things have changed rapidly since I left. I graduated as COVID was coming in, so academics looks wildly different from when I was there. But my perspective is that if you want to spend your career, gaining expertise in a very narrow band and pushing that band forward a little bit and understanding everything you can about some specific, thing that you care very deeply about, like academics can provide that for you. You can spend your entire career learning and understanding that thing and pushing an understanding of that thing forward. But if what you want to do is develop new technology and apply that technology, then academics isn't going to be it, right? And so I think we need to think more about getting people prepared to go into industry and do things like this. I was had a great benefit to be part of an entrepreneurial training program while I was in my postdoc and kind of showed me that this was a way in which I could apply technology, which is what I really wanted to do. So, yes and no, but I think it's, yeah, depends.
Yeah, super fair. What's the best thing that your parents taught you?
Um, My dad, he's got a bit of a hero complex. He's a firefighter, then a paramedic, and then a flight medic. He's always like, stick up for the little guy. If you see everyone picking on one person, don't just jump in and kind of do that because it's what's popular. Instead, you can actually, do better for them and for yourself, and maybe everyone by, instead sticking up for that person. And I kind of took that to heart. I think a lot of how we create and how I design and think about say the supplement industry really aligns with that.
Amazing, amazing. Last thing for you, I like to play this game with everyone that I have on the show. I just teach me something interesting, something unrelated. Well, honestly, this is a pretty fascinating topic. So if it's not something we've covered, it can be about GLP-1s, but just teaches us if we're new to some subject.
Interesting. Okay, because we were talking about the anthropological work I did. So, turns out the hominins in Tanzania back about 2 million years ago, they were making decisions on which stone tools to use based off of proximity to what was closest to them, but also the weather. So, the stone tool source that they really liked to use that I studied, they would use whenever the water levels were low, and then whenever the water levels would go up, they would choose something different. And this pattern of decision making was something that we were able to detect in the archaeological record, and now I can talk to you about it. So, yeah,
Fascinating.
that's an interesting fact that hopefully you didn't know.
Absolutely. I did not know that. It's fascinating. Well, Corey, thank you so much for hopping on this Looking Fox podcast. We would absolutely love to have you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the time.